In this Bible study, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 22, the first 14 verses, and we're going to see at least a few different ways in which we as Christians can minister to people who are poor without being condescending. So check it out. Hi, I'm Pastor Stuart Perry from New Life Community Church in sunny Burlingame, California. We are a church that really believes that a personal and a group relationship with God through Jesus Christ makes all the difference in life and in the life to come. And so we are absolutely committed to courageously and passionately pursuing that relationship and to doing it with humility with anyone and everyone who wants to join in. If that sounds interesting to you, then be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring that bell for notifications so that you will be the first to know whenever there's a new sermon or a new Bible study or some other kind of content posted on our YouTube page. So today we're doing a short Bible study on Matthew chapter 22, the parable of the banquet. And we're going to see at least a few different ways in which we as Christians can minister to people who are poor without being condescending. Now, this passage it does speak to that, but it also has another purpose, and its purpose is to talk about discipleship in the early church. So I'm drawing some meaning out of this that is related to and slightly to the side of, but consistent with the original teaching. And so I want to be clear about that. But the reason this is important is because so often as Christians, our attempts to minister to people that we perceive as poor, and I'll tell you right off the bat, one of the first things that you can do is not to label people as poor. I'm going to minister to the poor. The stereotype, of course, is the particularly white, suburban, rich kids who go off to a third world country to do a mission trip, and they minister to the poor, and most of what they do is they just take selfies with kids who are not white-skinned, and post them on their Instagram, and it creates some kind of credibility. I know that there has been some criticism of that, of white people particularly doing that at Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that to sort of show what great people they are. Well, don't do that. That's not what the Bible calls us to. It's not helpful, and God doesn't want you to do that. However, there are ways that we can reach out to, minister to, and with, maybe a key word, people who are poor, less fortunate, have a more difficult time in life than we do, no matter who we are. And so there's lots of different ways to do this better, but I want to focus just on a couple that come up in this particular passage because this is a Bible study. If you have a Bible, you can read along with me. Matthew chapter 22. It says this, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, and this is in a series of parables in Matthew. So there's a point at which Matthew just kind of puts a lot of the parables of Jesus in the same place. And this is part of one of those sections. So Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, and a parable is just a story with a point. Usually it is a made-up story, but it doesn't have to be. It's a story that makes a point. Verse 2, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. And he sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. And then he sent some more servants and said, tell those who've been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet, right? So God's going to have a party, and it's a birthday party for his son. So this is not like, a special meal for the homeless, right? Like we often do that during the holiday season. We have a special meal for the homeless. All the homeless people come in, and then all the regular people serve them. And it meets some needs. I don't want to be too critical of this, but you want to know it's really powerful at a meal like that? And I learned this in college. So I learned this over 20 years ago, is if the regular people actually sit down and have a meal with the homeless people or with the poor people, because it changes the dynamic of the relationship, and it's no longer it's no longer power person and person being served or rich person versus poor person. You're both sitting down over a meal. And so this is the wedding banquet for his son. So he's inviting people to a personal celebration, right? So that's really important. All right. Verse 5, but it goes all wrong. But they, the invited guests, paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them, right? Doesn't get any worse than this. One thing to remember is that when you're serving people, you're not always going to get oh, thank you, we're so grateful for what you've done. You're such a wonderful person. Sometimes service requires vulnerability. The king was enraged, and he sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners. And this is a way of saying, to even the bums on the street. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find. And so this is how we know in the story that the idea is that poor people as well as rich people are invited. So this is ministry to the poor. It's inviting the poor into your son's wedding banquet, right? Not just a special meal for them. Some people on the street may be rich. Some people maybe, may not need help, but are invited anyway. And so they're brought in together, not as sort of this subgroup of labeled poor people. So the king, then he said to his, so they bring in, he tells them to go bring in to the streets. This is verse 10. The servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. Okay, so I've made the points about that. Now, this is interesting. So, verse 11, but when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. And he asked, how did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend? The man was speechless. Now, you have to understand, they just dragged people in off the street. So nobody initially arrived with wedding clothes, you have to assume. But what did happen is, for most people when they came in, if they grabbed a farmer off of his farm, if they grabbed a bum off of the street, that they got there and they realized, I wasn't prepared for this. There's this massive wedding. It's the king's son. Everybody's dressed up. There's a big feast and stuff. So most of them then changed into wedding clothes. Maybe they were provided by the king's servants. Maybe they had some at home and they ran home and got them. I don't know how that worked, but everybody did it except this one guy. And this one guy, he didn't notice the house he was in. He didn't notice the grandeur. He didn't sort of recognize the occasion and make the effort to clean himself up. And the king is enraged. It says, verse 13, then the king told the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so in one context, this is about discipleship and people who come to Christ but don't bother to begin to get better, don't bother to live into the kingdom that they've been invited into. But I think it can also apply to an idea of ministering to people that it's okay to have high expectations. We can't expect people to be and do things they can't do, but we can expect them to do their best. You can expect someone to behave when you're trying to help them. You can expect them to, work on the thing that is going to improve their life. Helping people with no expectations leads to codependency. And that's not what God wants. God wants people to be freed to be able to serve him without coercion. And that requires that we have some expectation. So you can see that in the passage. And then the last verse, so many are invited, but few are chosen. And this kind of relates to the point I just made, that you're not going to be able to help everybody. There's some people that are some people are going to refuse, some people are going to refuse to get better. Some people, maybe you're just not the right person. Maybe God has somebody else for them. And all that's okay. You got to invite the crowd. So in our attempts to minister to the poor, our eyes have to be open that maybe there are people who are poor that we don't recognize their poverty. Sometimes it's easy if they're economically poor and you can tell they can't afford, to live in a house. It's easy to recognize, but there's a lot of other types of poverty. There's poverty of spirit, poverty of mental illness, poverty of addiction, poverty of just self-control. There's all kinds of poverty, and we may not recognize them all. So we invite everybody. But then there's some that are going to respond better to me, and there's some that are going to respond better to you, and there's some that are going to respond better to someone else. And it's okay that many are invited, or all are invited. Many are invited, but few are chosen. Sometimes as the person who feels called to help, you and I have to choose who we can help. It may even be that there are 10 people that we could help, but our own capacity is limited, and we can only do one or two. That happens to me all the time as a pastor. People call, and I want to call everybody back, and I want to pray with everybody, and I want to meet with everybody. But at this point, sometimes I just can't. And so everybody's invited, many are invited, but then sometimes I have to choose who I'm going to spend my time with. And I think that may be true for you. And it'll just transform how you think about your own ministry, and because if I think I have to serve everybody, if I think I have to help everybody, then I become paralyzed and end up not helping anyone because I don't want to discriminate. So just getting that right and understanding that that's okay actually frees you up to do something when otherwise you might have ended up doing nothing. So that's the passage we want to look at. The Bible study actually, so what we do is there is a Zoom discussion of this passage on Thursday. So I'm filming this on June 15th. That's Monday. Tuesday is the 16th. Wednesday is the 17th. So this is for June 18th, this Bible study, 7 p.m. on Zoom. The credentials will be in right here at the end of this video. If you're watching this at some other time, leave a comment, leave a question. But think about those things that I shared about the idea that the poor shouldn't be labeled and sort of segregated out as the poor. We invite all. And then the idea that we shouldn't just it doesn't serve them well to have no expectations and allow codependency. And then finally, the idea that that many are invited, but few are chosen. Which one of those things are harder for you to get your head around? What are your obstacles to serving the poor? What are your challenges? And if you have a chance, think about what is a success that you've had? How has God grown you in that, or taught you something in your service to others? These are just some questions that we can talk about on Thursday, or that we can talk about in the chat. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.